The Valoran Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries. Across the dark stretches of the galaxy, their name carried both awe and fear. They were a race of tall, silver-skinned beings with eyes that glowed faintly blue, and they believed that no one, not even the oldest civilizations, could match their power. Their fleets had conquered 164 star systems, each one crushed beneath their advanced weapons and ruthless strategy. Every victory became a celebration that fed their pride even more. Their soldiers marched through cities made of glass and metal. Their banners hung in the skies of captured worlds, and the echoes of their triumphs filled every corner of their empire. But pride is a dangerous thing. The Valorans began to see themselves as gods. They believed the galaxy was theirs to control, and that every other species existed only to serve or to fall. They recorded their victories in a sacred archive called the Chronicle of Stars, where each conquest was etched in shining crystal tablets. The High Warlord, Kael'th, would often stand before these tablets, gazing at the names of the worlds they had claimed, feeling that nothing could ever stop them. Yet somewhere deep inside, even he feared the silence that came after victory, the emptiness of endless conquest. One day, while their listening stations scanned the void for new targets, a signal came through. It was unlike anything they had heard before. It was not a distress beacon nor a military code. It was soft, almost chaotic. There were voices, laughter, strange rhythmic sounds that their translation systems struggled to define. The source was a small planet orbiting a yellow sun in a quiet arm of the galaxy. It was called Earth. The Valorans played the recordings in their grand hall. They listened to the sound of human music, to the hum of radio chatter, to speeches and news broadcasts. At first they were silent. Then laughter filled the chamber. These creatures talked to themselves through the air, one commander sneered. They have barely touched space travel. They are still bound to their ground. Another laughed even louder. They use metal shells that burn chemical fuel to reach orbit. How ancient. Kael'th listened too, smiling faintly. They are fragile, he said, but they have courage. You can hear it in their noise. His smile turned cold. It will make their defeat more satisfying. The Dominion's council agreed. Earth would become their next conquest, the 165th in their glorious line of victories. They called it a symbolic gesture, a reminder to the galaxy that even the smallest worlds must bow to Valoran strength. Preparations began immediately. The great shipyards of Vorel Prime came alive with activity. Massive vessels were built, each one large enough to blot out the stars when it passed. War drones were loaded by the thousands. Planetary cannons were fitted to the flagship, the Ascendant Wrath. Engineers sang songs of triumph as the fleet assembled. Kael'th stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching the ships drift into formation. Below him, rows of Valoran soldiers moved in perfect rhythm, their armor gleaming like silver fire. They had never known defeat. He looked proud, but his thoughts were elsewhere. In the quiet corners of his mind, he wondered if arrogance might one day cost them everything. Still, he brushed the thought aside. A single planet of primitives cannot challenge the Dominion, he whispered to himself. We are eternal. When the Armada was ready, the stars above their home system shone like diamonds, reflecting off the hulls of their ships. Kael'th gave a short speech before departure. His voice echoed through every vessel. We go now to claim another world, he declared. A world that dares to broadcast its existence to the stars. Let this be a lesson to all who forget their place. The Dominion does not ask for respect, it takes it. The soldiers roared in response. The fleet engines flared, and in a burst of blue light they vanished into the folds of space. Their journey through hyperspace was calm at first. Kael'th spent his time studying images of Earth collected from intercepted signals. He saw the planet's oceans, forests, and cities. He saw humans walking through crowded streets, building machines, fighting wars, and dreaming of peace. They were not united. They were divided by borders and beliefs. The Valorans found that amusing. They will surrender quickly, said one of Kael'th's lieutenants. They cannot even agree among themselves. Kael'th nodded but said nothing. He stared at the blue planet's image longer than he expected to. After several days of travel, the Armada reached the edge of the solar system. Their sensors picked up the gas giants and the frozen worlds that circled far from the sun. The fleet moved in silence, gliding past Saturn's rings, their hulls shimmering in the golden light. When they passed Mars, strange things began to happen. The navigational screens flickered. Communication signals between ships started to cut out for seconds at a time. Some systems reset themselves without command. The Valoran engineers dismissed it as solar radiation interference, nothing unusual for an uncharted system. Yet the deeper they went, the more unstable things became. Kael'th frowned as reports came in. 3 of our forward scouts have disappeared, an officer reported. No distress calls, they just vanished. Kael'th demanded explanations, but there were none. The ships had not been destroyed. They had simply stopped existing. He ordered new probes launched. Those 2 vanished within minutes. Still, Kael'th refused to turn back. No more hesitation, he commanded. We move on. As the Armada neared Earth, they began scanning for defensive structures. They found none. No orbiting stations, no fleet, not even active satellites beyond a few harmless probes. They are blind, a technician said proudly. This will be easy. But on the tactical display, something else appeared. Small heat signatures, dozens of them, were detected in orbit. Too small to be ships. Too irregular to be natural. The Valorans ignored them, labeling them as debris or ancient human machines. Kael'th opened a channel to the fleet and addressed his forces. This is it, he said calmly. Another world to bring into our dominion. Show them the might of the Valorans. Strike swiftly and leave nothing standing. The soldiers shouted their oath in unison. The fleet spread into attack formation, their weapons charging. But down on Earth, things were not as simple as they appeared. Humanity had seen the Valorans coming long before the Valorans saw them. Years earlier, something had crashed into the Pacific Ocean, a probe of alien origin, damaged but intact. The world's greatest scientists had studied it in secret, hidden beneath the cover story of a fallen satellite. The technology they found changed everything. It was unlike anything human minds had ever imagined. Matter folded into energy, gravity woven into machines. The world governments created a hidden alliance called the Aegis Initiative. They worked in silence, far from public eyes, to reverse engineer what they could and prepare for what might come. They built things that no one on Earth could even guess existed. Small silent drones hidden in orbit, disguised as fragments of space debris. They were armed not with explosives but with the power to bend the very fabric of space for fractions of a second, enough to erase anything that threatened the planet. The Aegis Initiative was never meant to attack. It existed for one purpose, defense. When the Valoran fleet entered the solar system, every satellite on Earth went dark. All radio transmissions stopped. To the approaching aliens, the planet looked asleep, unguarded, primitive. But deep beneath the surface, control stations hidden in old missile silos came alive. The people inside were calm but tense. They had trained for years but never believed this day would actually come. A single signal was sent from a bunker under Antarctica, encrypted so deeply that even human computers could barely read it. It was transmitted through a buried antenna on the moon's far side, aimed into space. It was not a plea. It was a message meant for those who had come too close. Try. The Valorans received the message seconds later. Their translation systems decoded it easily. One word. Kael'th laughed when he read it. They challenge us, he said. Good. Let them see what happens to those who defy the Dominion. He turned to his officers. Prepare the main batteries. Target their largest cities. End this quickly. His ship's massive weapons began to hum with power. Across the fleet, plasma cannons glowed, ready to fire. The countdown started. But then, just as the first energy pulses were about to launch, the ship's lights flickered. Every screen went dark. A moment later, chaos erupted. Systems crashed. Engines failed. Communication between ships was cut off entirely. What is happening? Kael'th shouted. No one answered. Outside the viewport, one of the smaller ships folded in on itself, vanishing without sound or explosion. Another followed, then another. The space around them rippled like water disturbed by invisible waves. Kael'th felt the floor tremble beneath him. His crew screamed as more ships disappeared one after another, like lights being switched off in a dark room. He tried to issue a retreat order, but his voice was lost in static. His flagship shook violently as space itself seemed to twist around it. The stars outside blurred. Then suddenly everything went silent. The earth hung below, blue and calm, untouched. No fire, no invasion, only quiet. And above that quiet world, the Valoran Armada began to vanish completely, leaving no wreckage, no trace, and no answer to what had truly happened. When the Valoran fleet entered the orbit of Earth, there was a deep silence inside every command room of there. Warships. Kyleth stood tall in front of the main display, watching the blue planet slowly turning beneath them. His eyes narrowed as he studied the clouds, the oceans, and the continents. He could see cities glowing faintly along the darkness of the night side. He could see movement of weather and the soft reflection of sunlight across the sea. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. The thought made him uneasy, but he did not show it to anyone around him. The crew waited for his order. The soldiers, ready at their stations, and the fleet hung above the world like a wall of silver light. Down on Earth, the hidden control centers of the Aegis Initiative were filled with tension. People sat in front of glowing screens, their faces pale and tired. The silence inside those rooms was broken only by the hum of machines and the faint voices of commanders giving quiet instructions. They had known this day would come, and yet none of them were ready to see it with their own eyes. Every radar, every satellite, every telescope showed the same thing. A fleet larger than any they had imagined had arrived in their skies. It was so huge that the moon's shadow trembled with reflected light from its engines. Some of the younger officers wanted to panic. Some wanted to send a message to warn the world, but the senior command stopped them. There could be no panic on the surface. The world above must stay quiet, must look weak and unaware. That was the plan. Kyleth opened a communication channel that reached every Valoran ship and also the surface of Earth. A deep, steady voice echoed across the airwaves, his words translated by the ship's computers into every language of Earth. People across different countries heard it on their televisions, on their radios, and even through broken static on their phones. People stopped in the middle of streets when they heard it. He said, "People of Earth, you are not alone in this galaxy. You stand before the Valoran Dominion, the masters of 164 worlds. Surrender your world now and you may live under our rule. Resist and you will be erased." It was the first voice from another world that humanity had ever heard. On the ground, some people cried, some fell to their knees, some refused to believe it was real. Others laughed in disbelief, thinking it was a trick or a broadcast experiment. But in a few secret bases under the oceans and in mountains, men and women who had worked in silence for years looked at one another. They knew what was about to happen. The message was forwarded to the Aegis Command Center hidden under the Antarctic ice. The leader there, a quiet man with gray hair, listened without expression. Then he turned to his operators and said one word. Now the small, orbital drones that had been built by the Aegis Initiative woke up. They had been sleeping for years, hidden among rocks and dust, orbiting Earth like junk. They were no bigger than a small car, but inside each of them was a core made of strange matter, stolen from the alien probe that had once crashed into the ocean. The cores hummed with invisible power. They began to move slowly, forming a wide, invisible net around the planet. The humans called it the Shield of Silence. And once it was active, no signal could leave or enter Earth without permission. Kyleth waited for an answer to his message. When none came, he frowned and ordered another transmission. His voice grew harder. People of Earth, this is not a negotiation. Surrender or face destruction. But again there was no reply. Only static filled the air. He looked to his officers, who checked the instruments and shook their heads. They said, "Sir, their transmission systems are not responding. They may not even understand our signal." Kyleth looked down at the world again and said, "They understand pride when they hear it. Send a demonstration." The first wave of Valoran warships moved into attack position. Their cannons glowed bright and aimed toward the largest human cities. They were ready to fire when suddenly their sensors began to act strange. One ship reported that its targeting system had lost calibration. Another said its engine power dropped to half. A third ship vanished from the radar completely. Kyleth demanded reports, and his bridge officers worked quickly trying to explain. The words made no sense. Ships disappearing without explosions, no energy readings, no debris. Only empty space. From the far side of the moon, a small pulse of light blinked, once invisible to human eyes but very clear on Valoran instruments. The light seemed harmless, but the moment it flashed, one of the destroyer-class ships folded into itself. The energy readings spiked and then dropped to nothing. The space where it had been became empty as if it never existed. Panic started to grow across the fleet. Kylth shouted for calm, ordering his captains to hold their positions, but before his words could reach them, more ships began to vanish. On Earth no one saw the battle in the sky. People went about their lives unaware of what was happening above them. The only ones who knew were inside the Aegis bunkers, watching the data streams with cold focus. Each drone above the planet locked onto its target. The alien fleet tried to fight back, firing plasma bolts that never reached their destination. Because the air around Earth bent light and energy away from the planet like a mirror, humans had learned to fold small pieces of space for brief moments, just long enough to make a weapon vanish or a shield form and disappear again. It was not perfect technology, but it was enough. Kylth realized too late that something was very wrong. He ordered the fleet to retreat, but the jump drives refused to activate. Every time they tried to open a gate through hyperspace, the space around them twisted and broke. The humans had locked them in their own trap. One of his engineers screamed that their systems were being rewritten, their coordinates scrambled. Kylth looked out of the viewport as more ships folded into nothingness like dust in the wind. He ordered his flagship to fire all weapons at the source of the disturbance, but the targeting systems refused to respond. The ship's core began to hum at a dangerous pitch. The lights flickered. The sound of metal groaning filled the air. Kylth grabbed the edge of the control table and shouted to his crew, "Find the source. Shut it down now." But it was too late. The flagship shook violently. The stars outside twisted. The view of Earth blurred, and then everything stopped. The noise vanished. The screens went black. Inside the command deck, there was silence. The officers looked at each other in confusion. Some whispered prayers in their alien tongue. Kylth stepped forward, staring into the void before him. He could not see Earth anymore. Only darkness and a faint shimmering in the distance. It was as if the world itself had vanished from sight. His hands trembled for the first time in his life. He opened a channel to all ships, but only static answered him. Slowly, one by one, the signal lights of his fleet turned dark in the Aegis control center. The operators watched the readings drop. They confirmed that no hostile energy signatures remained in orbit. No wreckage was detected. Nothing was left but faint ripples in the gravitational field around Earth. The commander leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "It is done." Then he gave the order to deactivate the defense grid. The drones powered down and went back to their silent orbits. The world below never knew how close it had come to destruction. Hours later, Kylth's flagship drifted alone in the void. His systems were half dead. The crew was terrified. They had never experienced silence like this before. No signals, no stars in the correct place, nothing. They were lost in a black ocean of space. Kylth tried to send a distress call to the Dominion, but the communication core refused to respond. Fragments of his message escaped, carried by strange distortions through the void. He said in broken phrases, "They are not primitive. They use space itself. We never stood a chance." Then the final spark of his transmission faded. Far across the galaxy, the Valoran Dominion waited for their fleet to return. They celebrated early victories, assuming Earth had fallen. Another tablet was being prepared for the Chronicle of Stars. But as days passed without any word, celebration turned to confusion. Then, Tafir recon ships sent to find the fleet never returned. The coordinates of Earth began to disappear from navigation systems, as if erased from existence. One by one, their machines stopped responding when pointed toward that part of the galaxy. The Dominion scientists could not explain it. The priests of their empire called it divine punishment. The military called it a forbidden zone. On Earth, life continued as normal. People woke up, went to work, and slept again, never knowing that an entire fleet had died above their heads. The leaders of the Aegis initiative destroyed all records of the event. Only a few knew the truth. The drones remained in orbit, quiet and hidden, waiting for the day they might be needed again. The commander of Aegis wrote a single note before sealing the files. It said, "We survived because we were underestimated." Never again. Kylth's final memory before his ship disappeared completely was the sight of Earth one last time, blue and shining in the dark, silent, and small, but stronger than any empire he had ever known. Then everything turned to light and was gone forever. The news of the missing fleet spread slowly through the Valoran dominion. At first, no one believed it. The great Armada that had left to conquer Earth was supposed to return in glory with songs and stories of another easy victory. The Chronicle of Stars already had a space left blank for the name of the new world. Priests had prepared the ritual of conquest, and the banners of the Dominion were ready to be raised across another system. But as the days passed and no signal came from the fleet, the laughter began to fade. Ships were sent to follow their route. They disappeared too, without a sound or trace, no wreckage, no distress, calls, only silence filling the space where thousands of warships should have been. In the capital city of the Dominion, the council gathered in the Grand Hall. The air shimmered with the light of holographic displays showing empty star maps and broken signals. The High Consul demanded answers. Scientists spoke of magnetic storms and spatial folds, but no one could explain how an entire armada could vanish, without leaving even a trace of debris. The military leaders whispered among themselves. Some suggested the humans had a hidden ally, perhaps an ancient race far older and stronger than the Valorans. Others said it was a trap of nature itself, but no one dared speak the truth aloud. The truth was that the Valoran Dominion had finally met something they could not understand. Kael'th's name was whispered in the streets. Some called him a hero, lost to mystery. Others called him a fool who led their greatest fleet to destruction. His family was brought before the council for questioning, but they knew nothing. His last recorded message was played again and again before the council. His voice broken and full of fear, saying only fragments. They are not primitive. They use space itself. We never stood a chance. Those words echoed through the hall like a curse. The consul ordered the recording sealed under the highest level of secrecy, and the name of Earth was erased from all public records. Meanwhile, far away on Earth, the world went on without knowing what had happened above their skies. The cities glowed at night. The seas moved under the same winds, and people lived their lives unaware of the silent victory their planet had achieved. The Aegis Initiative had gone into hiding after the battle. The leaders destroyed the communication networks used during the defense and locked away the technology that had saved them. The drones were left in orbit, still asleep but ready, if ever needed again. In a quiet base buried deep under the Arctic ice, a small group of scientists worked on one last task. They wanted to make sure no one could misuse the alien technology again. The chief scientist, a woman named Dr. Halen, watched the readings on her monitor with tired eyes. She had spent 10 years studying the strange matter that powered the defense drones, and she knew it was not fully understood. Even a small mistake could tear open a hole in space itself. The power that had erased the Valoran fleet was something beyond human control. Her assistant asked softly, "Do we destroy it all?" She nodded slowly, one by one. The cores of the drones were disconnected. The fragments of alien metal were placed in sealed containers and dropped into the deepest parts of the ocean. The Aegis project was officially ended, and all who had worked on it were told to forget what they had done. They would never speak of it again. But not everyone obeyed. In secret, a few scientists kept fragments of data. They believed the technology was too important to lose. They thought it could be the key to exploring the stars, not just defending against them. One of them, a young engineer named Riley, copied the encrypted files onto a hidden drive before leaving the base. He told himself it was for research for the future of humanity. But part of him wanted to know what had truly happened to the Valorans. While Earth returned to normal life, the Valoran Dominion began to fall apart. The loss of the fleet had shaken their belief in their own power. Their empire stretched across hundreds of worlds, and each one had once obeyed without question. But now doubt spread through the ranks. Commanders argued, scientists failed to explain. The disappearance, and priests said it was a punishment from the stars. Some outer colonies stopped paying tribute. Some small planets began to rebel, believing the gods had abandoned the Dominion. The High Consul ordered fleets to restore control, but they too moved cautiously, fearful of traveling near the region where Earth's system lay. Rumors grew like wildfire. There were stories of ghost signals in that part of space, Ships that passed too close reported hearing strange whispers on their comms, distorted voices that spoke in unknown languages. One freighter captain claimed to have seen a blue light far away that swallowed one of his escort ships whole. The crew returned home in silence, their faces pale with fear. After that, the Dominion declared the sector forbidden. No one was to approach the coordinates of Sol ever again. Back on Earth. Riley studied the hidden data every night in his small apartment. He watched the readings from the battle, the strange energy spikes that had appeared just before the alien ships vanished. He could see patterns that no human mind had noticed before. Waves in the fabric of space, like ripples on water. He realized that the defense drones had not destroyed the Valoran ships. They had moved them, displaced them somewhere else. He did not know where, but the energy signature showed movement, not annihilation. That thought haunted him. If the ships had been moved, then maybe somewhere out there, the Valoran fleet still existed. Trapped, lost, or worse, he decided to test his theory. He built a small device using the same energy pattern but at a much smaller scale. It took him years to complete, working in secret, moving from one lab to another to avoid attention. When he finally activated, a faint blue light filled the room. The air seemed to hum like a whisper from another world. His instruments showed impossible readings, as if space itself bent slightly around him. Then the light vanished, and everything returned to normal, but his computer screen now displayed new data coordinates from somewhere deep in the galaxy. A signal had returned. Riley stared at the numbers, trying to understand. He checked them again and realized they were from the same region where the Valoran fleet had vanished. The signal was weak, but it repeated every few minutes like a heartbeat. It was not human, and it was not random. Someone or something was calling from beyond. He contacted one of his old friends from the Aegis Initiative, a woman named Lyra who had worked on the communication systems. He showed her the data. At first, she refused to believe it, but when she saw the energy patterns, she grew pale. She said, "This is impossible. They are gone." Riley shook his head. Maybe not. What if they were never destroyed? What if they were trapped? Lyra warned him not to continue. The world was not ready for another contact. The governments had buried the truth, and if they found out he was trying to open the connection, they would silence him. But Riley could not stop. The curiosity burned in him like fire. He believed that if humans could understand what had happened, they could learn how to travel across the stars safely, without fear. He began to strengthen the signal sending, short bursts of coded data toward the coordinates far away in the darkness. Something stirred. In the void where the Valoran fleet had vanished, a faint light flickered. The remains of the flagship Ascendant Wrath drifted in an endless black space, surrounded by fragments of frozen time. The crew had long lost count of how long they had been there. Days felt like years, and years felt like nothing. The ship's systems barely worked. The stars outside never moved. They were trapped in a place where time did not flow. Normally, Kael'th sat in his chair, staring at the dark. He no longer gave orders. His crew barely spoke. They had food that never spoiled, and air that never ran out, but no sense of direction, no way to escape. Then one day, the ship's sensors picked up a weak signal. It was faint and strange, but familiar somehow. Kael'th listened closely. It sounded like a heartbeat, followed by a code he could not understand, but the rhythm was clear. It was a message from beyond, the dark. He turned to his officers and whispered, "Someone knows we are here." The crew stared at him, their eyes wide with hope and fear. On Earth. Riley's instruments showed a sudden surge of response. The signal had changed. It was now repeating his message back to him, slightly distorted but clear. He stared at the screen in disbelief. His hands trembled. He had reached them. He had made contact with something lost beyond the edge of reality, but he did not know what he had awakened the next night. Strange anomalies appeared around the orbit of Earth. Satellites flickered for seconds, then returned to normal power grids, experienced short blackouts without reason, and people across the world saw brief flashes of blue light in the sky that vanished before cameras could capture them. The Aegis Initiative was quietly reactivated in secret. The commanders feared that the barrier that had once protected Earth was weakening. Riley was taken by a group of agents who arrived at his home in the middle of the night. They took him to a hidden facility, where he was questioned for hours. He told them everything, but they refused to believe until they saw the data themselves. When they confirmed that the Valoran signal was real, they locked the information. Away again, Riley tried to warn them that the connection could open both ways, but no one listened. Deep in the void, Caleth felt the pull of space changing. The walls of the dark prison began to shimmer. The stars returned slowly, like candles being lit one by one. The crew cried in disbelief as they saw light again. But with that light came a terrible realization. They were not returning to their own space. Something was bringing them somewhere new, toward the source of the signal toward Earth. Again, Riley sat in the cold room staring at the single monitor in front of him. His hand shook as he watched the faint pulses of light appear on the screen over and over again. The signal had changed again. It was no longer random. It was stronger. Now it had rhythm. It almost sounded alive. The agents who had brought him to the underground facility had left him alone for hours. Only cameras watched from the corners of the ceiling. He felt both terrified and proud. He had reached across the unknown, and something had answered him. He whispered softly to himself, "They are out there, and now they know we are here." In another part of the facility, a group of officers and scientists gathered around a long table. The atmosphere was tense. The leader of the revived Aegis Initiative, General Hart, spoke in a low voice as he looked at the digital map projected before them. "The signal pattern matches the one recorded during the Valoran incident 20 years ago," he said. His voice carried no emotion, but everyone in the room understood the weight of his words. "It means they are alive, or at least something from that fleet still exists." The scientists exchanged worried looks. One of them, a young woman named Dr. Elan, said quietly, "If they are alive, how have they survived all this time? The physics of that anomaly should have erased them completely." The general gave her a hard look. "That is what we have to find out." Outside the hidden base, the world above remained unaware. People lived normal lives under blue skies. The oceans moved as they always had. The stars at night looked peaceful, but strange things were happening. Satellites were malfunctioning. For seconds at a time, GPS systems lost accuracy. Communication towers picked up static that sounded like whispers. The scientists at Aegis began to notice a growing disturbance in the magnetic field around Earth. It was faint but steady like a ripple, moving closer every day. In the dark void beyond space, the Valoran flagship floated half-broken and surrounded by stillness. Kyle had stopped counting the days. He no longer knew if time was passing at all. His crew moved slowly, their minds tired and quiet. The ship's lights flickered weakly, but for the first time in years, the sensors began to show movement. There was a thin stream of energy forming outside the hull. It shimmered like fog, but Caleth could feel it. He could feel the pull, the same kind of pull he had felt when they had first vanished. He called his surviving officers to the bridge. They stood silently as he said, "We are not alone. Something is calling us home." The crew did not cheer. They were too afraid. They remembered the last time they had felt hope only for it to end in nothing. The ship's navigator tried to analyze the energy, but the results made no sense. The readings showed coordinates shifting constantly, but all of them pointed toward the same region of space, the system of Sol. The humans. Caleth's voice was barely a whisper. His second-in-command, a scarred officer named Varen, turned to him and said, "If we go there again, we may not survive." Caleth stared into the dark and said softly, "If we stay here, we are already dead." The energy outside the ship grew brighter. It swirled around them like a storm of blue mist. Then, without warning, the stars changed. The crew fell to the floor as the ship shuddered violently. The instruments screamed, with alarms and lights flashed across every panel. When the shaking stopped, they saw a sight none of them believed possible. The sun of Earth burned ahead of them, smaller than before, but unmistakable. The planets were there: Mercury, Venus, and then The blue glow of Earth itself. They were back on Earth. The Aegis facility went into full alarm. Sirens echoed through the underground halls as the sensors confirmed the impossible. A large object had appeared on the outer edge of the solar system, where nothing had been before. General Hart stared at the readings. "It's them," he said quietly. His voice was heavy and calm, but everyone in the room could feel the fear spreading. A command was given to activate the old defense grid. The silent drones that had been asleep for decades began to awaken one by one. Their cores glowed faintly as they adjusted their positions in orbit. Riley was brought into the control room by 2 guards. The general looked at him and said, "You started this now. You will help us stop it." Riley tried to explain, "I didn't know they could come back. I just wanted to understand." The general cut him off with a sharp gesture. "It doesn't matter what you wanted. All that matters is what happens now. Tell me how to shut them out." Riley looked at the screens showing the rising energy readings around Earth. He shook his head. "The connection is open on both sides now. If you close it too fast, the space fold could collapse and tear half the system apart." Up in orbit, the first of the drones locked onto the returning Valoran ship. They recognized the same energy signature from years ago and prepared to strike. But before they could fire, the ship sent a signal, a short pulse of sound that matched human frequency. The drones paused as if confused. The signal repeated again, a simple pattern of tones. Morse code. The humans in the command room watched in silence as the message appeared translated on the main screen. It said, "We seek to talk, not to fight, General." Hart stared at the words. The officers argued around him. Some shouted to destroy the ship before it was too late. Others said to listen. The general finally raised his hand and said, "Silence." Then he turned to Riley. "Can you open a safe communication channel?" Riley hesitated, then nodded slowly. He tapped a few commands into the console and a secure frequency opened. The static filled the room for a moment before a voice came through. It was deep, calm, and weary. "This is Kylth of the Valoran Dominion. We come not for war. We seek understanding." The room was silent for a long moment. No one knew what to say. The general finally answered in a slow, steady tone. "This is General Hart of Earth. You attacked our world. You destroyed our skies. Why should we believe you?" Kylth's voice came back through the speakers, filled with regret. "Because we were wrong," he said. "We thought we could rule everything. We thought you were weak. But in our arrogance, we touched something we could not control. Your world showed us our limits. It sent us into a place without time. We have seen what pride becomes, and we do not wish to repeat it." The scientists listened in disbelief. Riley could hear the exhaustion in Kylth's voice. He could tell this was no trick. The Velarans had been changed by what they had experienced. He leaned toward the microphone and spoke quietly. "What do you want from us?" Kylth replied simply, "We want to live again. We want to learn what happened, and perhaps to return home." The general did not answer immediately. He turned to his advisors, who whispered urgently. Some argued that helping them could be dangerous. Others said it could lead to peace. Finally, he looked back at Riley and said, "What do you think?" Riley thought of everything that had happened, of the destruction of the fleet, of the silence that had followed for decades. He said softly, "Maybe this is our chance to end it. Not with fear, but with understanding." The general sighed heavily and gave the order to hold fire. The drones powered down and drifted back into passive orbit. The Valoran ship remained still far from Earth, but close enough to be seen by telescopes around the world. The secret could no longer be hidden. News of the strange light in the sky spread quickly across the planet. People looked up at night and saw the faint glimmer of silver moving among the stars. Governments tried to control the story, but it was too late. Humanity had seen proof again that they were not alone. Kylth watched the blue planet from the bridge of his ship. The sight filled him with quiet awe. It looked unchanged, yet everything felt different. He turned to Varen and said, "They do not attack us. Maybe there is hope." Varen said softly, Hope is fragile. Kael'th nodded. Yes, but it is still hope on Earth. The Aegis team began working to stabilize the energy field between the two worlds. The scientists used the remaining alien fragments stored in deep vaults to understand the bridge that had opened. They discovered that the strange matter reacted to human and Velaran technology in a way that balanced space instead of breaking it. It was dangerous, but it could allow controlled travel for the first time in history. Riley spent hours talking with Kael'th through the channel. They spoke about science, about time, and about how fear and pride had led to war. Kael'th told him that in the dark void they had seen things beyond comprehension, shapes that moved without form, voices that whispered from the edges of thought. He said that the void was not empty but filled with something watching both species from afar. Riley listened quietly, realizing that both humanity and the Valorans had barely begun to understand the universe. But not everyone wanted peace. Some factions within the Valoran Dominion saw Kael'th's message as weakness and betrayal. They wanted revenge. They began to send smaller fleets toward Earth, ignoring the warnings from the Council. Their ships were still weeks away, but the threat grew stronger with each passing day. When the Aegis team detected the incoming fleets, General Hart knew the fragile peace was about to break again. He turned to Riley and said, "We may have to destroy the gateway." Riley looked at him in fear. "If you do that, both sides could be trapped again." The general nodded grimly. "Maybe that's the only way." Kael'th heard the same news from his own scouts. He knew the Dominion would never allow peace with a world that had humiliated them. He spoke to Riley one last time over the channel and said, "If they come, do not hesitate. You must protect your world even if it means destroying us." Riley could hear the sadness in his voice and said quietly, "There has to be another way." Kael'th smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who still believes in mercy. Keep that belief. It is what makes you human." Outside the orbit of Earth, the stars began to shimmer again as distant signals of new ships appeared. The peace they had fought for was about to be tested, and this time, neither side knew if survival would mean victory or the end of everything they both understood. The sky above Earth looked calm, but inside the Aegis base there was no calm at all. The air was filled with the sound of alarms, screens flashing red, and voices shouting orders. The Valoran fleet had been detected moving closer through the edge of the solar system, not one ship this time, but many. The readings showed their engines burning bright like a storm of light crossing the void. General Hart stood at the center of the command room, his hands behind his back, his eyes fixed on the live feed coming from the defense satellites. He did not speak for a long moment, and when he finally did, his voice was heavy and quiet. "They are coming faster than we expected." Riley watched the same screens, his heart pounding. He had spent the last few days working with Kael'th through the secure channel, trying to stop what was coming. Kael'th had warned them that not all in the Valoran Dominion wanted peace. Some had seen Earth as an insult that needed to be erased to prove their power again. Kael'th's words echoed in his mind. "The ones who come now will not listen. They believe they carry the honor of our empire." Riley had tried to convince the general to trust Kael'th, but Hart was a soldier who had seen too many wars. He said quietly, "I will trust words only when they are stronger than weapons high above the planet." Kael'th's ship floated near the moon, silent and damaged. The crew worked tirelessly to repair the power systems while watching the approaching fleets. Their sensors showed dozens of smaller ships followed by two massive carriers, the kind that had destroyed worlds. Kael'th stood at the viewing deck, his eyes filled with guilt and dread. Varen came beside him and said, "The Dominion will not stop. They believe this war is holy." Kael'th nodded slowly, then said softly, "They are wrong, but they will not see it until everything is gone on Earth." People around the world began to notice strange lights moving across the night sky. Some thought they were comets, others believed they were new satellites, but the truth was far more terrifying. Governments tried to hide the truth, but soon the information leaked and panic started to spread. News channels showed images of glowing trails in space, while experts debated what they were. The word alien returned to every screen and every conversation inside the Aegis base. Dr. Ellen was working non-stop to stabilize the gateway field that still connected Earth and the Valoran ship she had discovered. That the energy forming around the planet was not only reacting to their technology, but also growing stronger with the presence of the returning fleets. It was as if the universe itself was reacting to their conflict. She ran to the general and said the field is expanding on its own. If it keeps growing, it will reach the moon in 2 days. General Hart turned sharply. What does that mean? She swallowed hard. It means space will start breaking apart. Riley overheard and stepped forward. There has to be a way to stop it. Maybe if Kael'th helps us stabilize it. The general looked at him sharply. We cannot trust them, Riley said. But if we don't, we might lose everything. The general stared at him for a moment, then said, Get him on the channel moments. Later, Kael'th's tired voice came through the speakers. This is Kael'th. What is happening? Riley explained the situation quickly. Kael'th listened in silence, then said, I know this energy. It is the same that trapped us long ago. The void will open again if it grows too strong. You must reduce the resonance from both sides. I can do it from here, but I will need time. The general asked, How much time? Kael'th answered. Slowly. 36 hours. Hart gave a sharp order to the crew. Buy him that. Time. Send warnings to all defense units and prepare for engagement. He turned to Riley and said, If his people reach Earth before he finishes, we will destroy the field. Riley felt his stomach twist, but he nodded. He knew the general would do what was necessary far beyond Mars, the Valoran fleet leader. Commander Tyron sat in the bridge of his carrier. His armor glowed faintly with the symbol of the old Dominion. His eyes burned with hatred as he looked at the image of Earth. He spoke to his crew in a voice cold as stone. We lost our pride because of these creatures. We lost our fleet to their skies. Today we end that shame. He raised his hand and the fleet adjusted its course directly toward Earth. The energy from their engines created waves that rippled across the void. Kael'th watched their movement from his weakened sensors. He knew Tyran well, a warrior who never questioned orders and never forgave defeat. He turned to his crew. Prepare the signal disruptors and open all channels. He was not sure if his ship could fight, but he had to try. He knew that if Tyran reached Earth first, there would be no turning back. On Earth, the Aegis Command received the update. The Valoran fleet would enter range in less than a day. The global defense systems were activated for the first time since the first invasion. Hundreds of orbital drones rose from secret silos around the world. Each drone carried heavy plasma cannons powered by alien reverse-engineered technology. They moved into formation like silent sentinels waiting for the order to fire. The sky around Earth began to fill with invisible energy, ready to defend the planet. Riley sat alone in the communication room, speaking to Kael'th. The alien's voice was weaker now, their power systems failing. Kael'th said, I will try to block their signal, but they will detect us soon. When that happens, they will attack my ship. Riley asked, Why do you keep helping us? You could just leave. Kael'th was silent for a long moment, then said, Because I started this war long ago, I led the first fleet that came to your world. I believed we were gods and you were nothing. Now I see how wrong I was. Maybe this is my way to make peace with what I did. Riley could feel the pain in his voice. He said quietly, You are not the same man you were then. Kael'th gave a soft laugh. Maybe not, but I will not let the same mistake destroy 2 worlds. Hours passed. The Valoran fleet grew closer. The instruments at Aegis began to show the energy levels rising rapidly. Dr. Ellen shouted from her console, The field is destabilizing. The general ordered increased power to the stabilizers. She shook her head. It is not enough. The other side must match our frequency. Kael'th's voice came. Over the channel I am trying, but the interference is too strong. Their fleet is blocking the signal. The general looked at Riley and said, Tell him to do whatever he must. Kael'th turned to Varen. Prepare the last of the energy cells. We are going to overload the main core. Varen looked at him in shock. That will destroy the ship. Kael'th nodded calmly. Yes, but it will also clear the interference for a short time. Do it. Varan hesitated, but then obeyed. The crew moved quickly, connecting wires, and aligning the core. Kael'th stood at the center and whispered, "May our end be our redemption." Then he gave the final command, "Activate." A flash of blue light burst from the ship, spreading through the void. The sensors on Earth went wild. The interference vanished instantly. Kael'th's voice came through one last time. "Do it now," Riley shouted to the scientists. "Synchronize the field frequencies." The entire room shook as the energy waves collided. The bright light filled every screen, then slowly began to fade. When it cleared, the readings showed the field had stabilized, but the signal from Kael'th's ship was gone. Riley stared at the empty screen. His voice broke as he whispered, "He's gone." The general stood silently for a moment, then turned away. "Get me the latest readings." The operator said, "The fleet is still coming." Sir Hart's jaw tightened. "Then we fight." The Valoran fleet crossed the orbit of Mars, moving toward Earth like a wall of light. The human defense drones engaged first, launching energy beams that lit up the darkness of space. The Valoran ships answered with their own fire, turning the sky into a storm of explosions. The battle began without mercy. Ships burned and vanished one after another. The Earth below watched, the faint flashes in the night like distant stars dying. Inside the Aegis base, Riley watched helplessly. He had lost the only voice that had tried to stop this war. Dr. Ellen was crying softly at her console. The general's voice came through steady, but tired. "Hold the line. Every second we delay them is another second. Earth survives." Far beyond the chaos among the wreckage, a faint light flickered. It was what remained of Kael'th's ship, half destroyed but still moving. The emergency systems had kept a small chamber intact. Inside, Kael'th lay unconscious, breathing weakly. The ship's computer whispered warnings around him, but the small beacon it sent out carried a message. One final signal repeating over and over again, a single phrase: "Stand together, not apart on Earth." Riley received the weak transmission. He could barely believe it. The signal pattern was faint but familiar. He ran to the general's station. "It's him. He's alive." The general looked at the data and said, "If that's true, maybe we can use it to turn the fleet away," Riley said. Hart pointed at the signal. "If we amplify it through the old Valoran relay, it might reach their communication band. If they hear their commander's message, they may stop." Riley nodded immediately and ran to the terminal. The scientist worked quickly, connecting systems and rerouting power minutes. Later, the old relay came online. A bright wave of energy pulsed through the dark, reaching the incoming Valoran ships. The message repeated, again and again: "Stand together, not apart." For a moment, the enemy fleet continued moving forward. Then slowly, the readings began to change. One by one, their weapons went offline. Their ships drifted into silent formation and stopped. The battle ended. Not with an explosion, but with quiet in the control room. No one spoke. They watched the screens showing the frozen ships suspended in space. The general let out a slow breath. "It's over for now." Riley leaned back in his chair, exhausted. He whispered softly, "Thank you, Kael'th." Far above the world, the faint light from Kael'th's broken ship dimmed as it drifted through the silence. His final message continued to echo through the stars. A small reminder that even the proudest enemies could still find peace in the face of their own destruction. And for the first time in a long time, Earth slept under a quiet sky. The morning after the battle was quiet. The skies above Earth looked normal again. But everyone who had seen what happened knew the world had changed forever. In the Aegis command room, people moved slowly like they were walking through a dream. The screens that had shown flashes of war now showed stillness. No more explosions. No more warnings, only silent dots marking the motionless Valoran ships floating. In orbit, General Hart stood by the large window that faced the sky, and for the first time in many years he looked tired. The battle had ended without a final shot, but the cost was heavy. Thousands of drones were gone. Many cities had lost power, and communication systems were broken. Yet somehow Earth still stood, and that alone felt like a miracle. Riley sat at his desk, staring at the small monitor that showed the last coordinates of Kael'th's ship. The signal was still weak, but it was there flickering softly through the noise. He had barely slept since the transmission stopped. He kept hearing Kael'th's last words in his mind. Stand together. Not apart. Those words had changed everything. They had stopped the fleet. They had saved Earth, he whispered quietly to himself. You did it, my friend. You stopped the war outside in orbit. The Velaran ships remained silent. Their engines were off, their weapons cold. It was as if the entire fleet had fallen asleep. Some believed they were waiting for orders. Others thought the signal had reached deep into their systems and shut them down permanently. The truth was that no one really knew what had happened inside those ships. But one thing was clear. They were no longer attacking. Earth days passed and slowly calm began to return. People started going back to work. Children went to school again. The news channels talked about unity and strength. The governments that had once argued began to speak together for the first time. They called for cooperation to rebuild what was damaged and to understand what had happened in the skies above. All they wanted to make sure it would never happen again. The scientists of Aegis worked day and night studying the Velaran technology and the strange energy field that still hovered faintly around the planet. They found that the field was no longer growing. It had become stable, almost peaceful, like it had found balance between two worlds. Dr. Ellen said softly to Riley, "Maybe that's what Kael'th meant. Stand together, not apart." When both sides stopped fighting, the energy stopped breaking. She smiled a little through her tired eyes. Maybe the universe itself understands peace better than we do. Riley smiled back. It took a war to teach us that lesson. General Hart called a meeting with the world leaders. It was the first time in history that every major nation joined the same broadcast. The general stood before the cameras and spoke in his steady voice. For too long we feared the unknown. We looked at the stars and saw only threats, but today we know the truth. The unknown is not always our enemy. Sometimes it is a mirror showing us who we really are. He paused, then said, Earth has survived because we stood together. We will rebuild not as nations but as one world. There was silence after he spoke, but soon it spread through the world. People cheered, cried, and for the first time felt proud not of power but of unity. In the weeks that followed, small missions were sent to study the silent Velaran fleet. They moved carefully using drones to avoid danger. The ships were massive and beautifully built, but cold inside like monuments from another time. The crews were gone, their systems empty. Only faint traces of life support and echoing corridors remained. On one of the smaller ships they found something unexpected, a small storage unit with recordings from the Valoran network. The scientists played them back and heard voices speaking in calm, measured tones. They were messages from Kael'th to his people before the war. He had warned them not to attack again. He had told them that power without wisdom brings only darkness. Riley listened to those messages with tears in his eyes. Kael'th had tried to save them even before his final act. Weeks turned to months and the world changed. People no longer looked up at the stars with fear. They looked with curiosity. New programs began across the planet combining human and Velaran technology to explore space and peace. For the first time there was talk not of invasion or defense, but of connection. The energy field around Earth became a bridge, not a weapon. A small research station was built near the edge of the field and named the Unity Post. Scientists from all countries worked there together, studying how space and energy could interact without destruction. Riley spent most of his days at the Unity Post. He had become the symbol of peace between two worlds. The people admired him, but he did not care for fame. He cared about the work, about finding out what Kael'th had seen in the void. One evening as he sat alone in the control room, he noticed a flicker on the monitor. It was faint, almost like static, but it repeated in a pattern. He leaned closer, trying to decode it. It was the same frequency as Kael'th's last message, but weaker. He adjusted the controls, and slowly the signal grew clearer. Then he heard a single voice, faint and broken, but real. Riley, it said. His heart stopped. He whispered back. Kael'th, is that you? The signal crackled for a long moment, then came again, weak but alive. Kael'th said, I am here. Riley called the others immediately. The team rushed in and began working to stabilize the connection. The signal came and went like waves of light, but the words were clear enough. Kael'th was alive, barely, but alive. He said, the void did not take me completely. I drift between worlds. I see the bridge you made. It holds. It is strong, Riley asked. Can we bring you back? Kael'th answered softly. Not now, maybe not ever. My body is gone, but my mind remains within the field. The energy keeps me here between time. Do not be sad. This is how it should be. The bridge needs a voice to keep it steady. Riley felt his chest tighten. He wanted to argue, to find a way to save him, but Kael'th's voice was calm and peaceful. Do not fear for me. I see many things now. I see your world growing. I see the Valorans changing. They have stopped fighting. The fleets that once followed Tyran are drifting in peace. They too have heard the message. It spreads like light through the dark, Doctor. Ellen whispered to Riley. He's stabilizing the field from the other side, that's why it hasn't collapsed. Riley understood then that Kael'th had become part of the bridge itself. His spirit was holding the balance between their worlds, he said quietly. You saved us again. Kael'th's voice was faint, but warm. We saved each other. Months passed, and the connection with Kael'th grew weaker, but the energy field remained strong. The scientists discovered that when they transmitted messages of harmony, music, or calm sounds, the field glowed brighter. It was as if it responded to emotion itself. The people began to call it the light of unity. Every night across the planet, people could see it faintly glowing near the edge of the sky, a small band of silver light that reminded them of what they had survived. General Hart retired soon after, saying he had done his part. He spent his last years near the sea watching the sunrise. He often said that the quiet sound of waves reminded him of space, vast and endless but calm. Riley continued his work with Dr. Ellen and the others, building the next generation of ships designed not for war but for travel through the bridge. They planned to cross into the other side one day to find the Valorans who had survived and to build a new beginning together. One night, Riley stood outside the research station looking at the glowing light in the sky. The wind was cool and the stars shone clearly. He thought of everything that had happened, of the fear, the loss, and the hope that followed. He remembered Kael'th's words, stand together, not apart, and realized they were not just about peace between species. They were about everything, about humans, about life itself. No one survives alone. He closed his eyes and whispered softly into the night, thank you, old friend. As the years went on, the story of the Armada that vanished and the voice that returned became legend. Children learned it in schools. People spoke of it not as a war but as a lesson. The name Kael'th became a symbol of redemption. The Valorans, who eventually made contact years later, spoke of him too as the one who opened their eyes. They built monuments not of stone but of light in his honor. When the first joint human and Valoran ship finally crossed the bridge, it carried a single message carved into its hull: stand together, not apart. The ship moved through the glowing field and disappeared into the stars, leaving behind a world that had learned something priceless, that arrogance could destroy but understanding could rebuild, that even the proudest enemy could become the greatest ally, that sometimes peace begins with a single voice calling out across the dark. And somewhere in that quiet light between worlds, a faint echo still remained. A soft voice whispering through the endless stars, reminding all who listened that unity was stronger than power and that the greatest victory was not in destruction, but in survival together.